Hi, welcome to the joint webinars with Infoblox and Empower Networks. Thank you so much for joining. This is part of a series of joint webinars that we've been doing with amazing success, and looking at the list of people that are joining, I think this is set to be another success again. We'll be talking about DNS attacks and data infiltration, data exfiltration today. And so my guests, or my hosts for today, are Adam and Michael, and I will hand it over to them. Adam, Michael, take it away.
Thank you very much, Ingmar. As you stated, today we're going to be going over the attacks, data infiltration, exfiltration, and just overall coverage of the DNS and some interesting parts about it. By all means, during the presentation, please do ask your questions, and we can always get to them at the end of the presentation. Where's Michael?
Hi, yes, so I'm michael.ell. I'm with Empowered Networks. We're, as Ingmar said, we've been doing a series of these presentations, and really, I'm going to start this off. This is just a quick agenda. I'm going to start off this with a little bit of a discussion on operations and security, and that ties together the various different components of this series of talks. And then we're going to dig into DNS specifically and some of the attacks, the classes of attacks and types of attacks that happen, and that includes both attacks on users or against users, as well as attacks that happen via the DNS. So first, let's just take a step back here, and this is something that will be familiar to those of you who were with us for some of the other entries in this series of talks. There's a change going on with network security. So there's these competing priorities that are happening. Business, of course, wants to accelerate. They have this imperative to innovate, differentiate, to move things forward as quickly as possible. And they have this expectation that that movement and the improvements, which have generally a large impact on or have a large tie into operations, are going to happen without there being an increase in the amount of resources that they're consuming. So operations is expected to do more with less. I mean, in a best case scenario, they're expected to do more with what they have, but in most cases, they're actually being asked to do more with less. At the same time, from a security point of view, the landscape is becoming increasingly dangerous. And that really comes down to the recognition that data has a lot of value, and the people going after that data are the criminals, the state-level actors. And what's really important here is the fact that the type of attacks they're using to go after this data are massively asymmetric. And what I mean by that is that very small levels of effort on the part of the attacker translate into huge impacts on the attack. So you end up with, in most organizations, dealing with that problem by having an operations group and a security group. But there's some issues with this separation. So, you know, operations is doing what they can to get the work done with less impact or less input of resources. And security is trying to protect the castle, as it were. And although, you know, you end up with this separation where, although operations is responsible for security, because everyone's responsible for security, we have a situation where there can be some abdication of that responsibility because, you know, we have the security system. There's the security team that is supposed to do that, and so the silos become more siloed and separated. And a funny offshoot of that, or a worrying offshoot of that, is that there tends to be this belief that the components inside the security shell are treated as protected just by virtue of where they are. But the reality in the current world is that the network is borderless. And so it's this idea of the shell is outdated. And really, you need to worry, like, people are in the house right now. You need to make sure that all the doors are locked in that house. The challenge then is that in order to address this, we really need to start considering that the operational both the operational processes, the operational tools, and even the core operational tools, things like DNS, can no longer sort of stand independent of the security that protects them. Those all need to be pulled together. And if you extend that, then you have this idea of the concept of the separated silos of the security team and the operation team. That's not really a viable option any longer. For two big problems, or then there's two big problems around that. One is that it splits the focus and limited resources. We'll talk a little bit about that challenge of resourcing a little bit later in the presentation. But it also isolates security away from the people that can actually do something about it, and that's the operations team, particularly when we're talking about something like DNS, where operations are running the DNS. The security guys, to a large degree, are isolated from being able to make changes to it, and the operations guys that can make those changes, they're somewhat abdicated from responsibility. So pulling them together is hugely important, and really it comes down to security really needs to become just a discipline of operations. So if you accept this premise, then you can start to look at some of the tooling or all of the tooling and all of the services that operations deal with and start to look at them not just from the point of view of operations, but also from the point of view of security, how they can be attacked and how you can prevent those attacks or work against those attacks in an operational space. And we talked about this in a previous example of this, or a previous session of this presentation. We talked about discovery, for instance. In this one, we're going to focus on DNS. So one of those core services of operations that, as it turns out, is also a significant target for bad actors.
Mm-hmm. And one thing I do think is worth emphasizing, exactly what Michael said there about the borderless. We're moving to a borderless network, and I think that saying's worth saying again is the keys to the castle. So there used to be the concept of, if you had a weaker endpoint, an endpoint with password on it, you're like, oh, whatever, by then they're already in our network. Why would they go for this particular endpoint? We need to change our mindset around that. We need to understand, just like Michael said, that we now need to lock all the doors within our house, not just our front door. With the way that the network traffic is being shaped, that's the way that things are going to start to look in the future, and it's very likely that's how they're already starting to look in your network. Now,
just to kick things off, we're actually going to start things with a quick poll of the audience. And this is a pretty simple question here. It's, do you feel that your organization is susceptible to a DNS-based attack? We have a range of options there, so we'll give everyone just a moment or two to put that into place. We're really interested in the sentiment because we have observed in different customers we've looked at, we've observed some disconnects between people's sentiment around this sort of question and the way they actually approach the problem in reality.
Mm-hmm. And just to speak to that, a bit about myself is I've spent about 20 years in the IT space, a lot of networking, dev operations. And if you would have asked me, hey, do you know about DNS? I'd have been like, oh, for sure, definitely. I know all the moving parts of DNS. And then if you would have asked me, do you think it's a security issue? I would have been, no, probably not, right? So that's, even though a lot of people we see in the field, even though they're involved with this stuff every day, they don't realize how susceptible you can be to it. And we're going to get into that.
All right, so hopefully everyone's put in an answer here. We'll flip ahead and just see what the answers were. So it's heartening to see that that we have 0% think that they're not at all likely to have a DNS-based attack. Mm-hmm. It looks like the majority, actually this is following really closely on a bell curve.
Yeah.
From the look of it.
Yeah.
So people are sort of in the middle, and that's sort of what we expect to see. It's not.
And you can tell there's IT professionals on the phone. Everyone's hedging their bet with we're not going for the not at all likely. That's just, stay away from that definitive one. Okay, excellent, good. Moving on. So what we want to ask ourselves is why it's important. The number one attack vector is DNS. 95%, I've seen that number go up all the way to 98%. 95% of today's malware attacks involve DNS, and we'll go over a couple of the different ways they do that. But then, when you look at the other side of the coin, only 68% of organizations monitor their DNS and monitor their recursive DNS queries. So effectively, the biggest attack surface has the least amount of visibility, and some people don't even consider it an issue. So these two data points beside each other really highlight how much of an issue this is in the marketplace at large. And of course, why is it important? There's serious financial costs associated with this. This is as of 2016, so keep in mind it's only gotten exponentially worse. As of 2016, up to 10,000 people per month were being ransomed for different types of cryptoware, WannaCry, all those things, up to 10,000 people a month. So that's only getting worse, and it's only accelerating. So there's huge financial costs, and these are not even just reputation, just huge financial costs associated with trying to get your data back, so forth and so on.
And of course, DNS is a core component of those types of attacks.
Exactly. And we've got some more figures around that to really drive home these points here. So one issue we have in the security space is we literally do not have enough people. There's a huge shortage when it comes to security experts in the marketplace just for open positions now. This isn't projecting. This isn't as of 2020 or 2021. We suspect that we're going to need this many people. These are the amount of open recs currently existing, and we already have a huge shortage of people. Keep that in mind.
And just a note on that is this goes back to that original comment that I said, that the idea of splitting now your operations and your security into separate silos. That just exacerbates the problem of taking those resources and splitting them across two different areas where they really should be one and the same.
Exactly. Time to start crossing those disciplines over. So just some data to kind of really drive this stuff home here. Let's see, one moment. So, which cyber attacks are the greatest of concern? We have advanced malware all the way down to phishing and social engineering. One thing you're going to see that all these different data points have in common is they're all going to be using DNS. DNS-based data exfiltration, doubly so. But all these things are going to be relying on DNS in order to accomplish this. And if we look a bit further, what important features are you using to protect against DNS? The main takeaway here is the ability, so they want to be able to reduce noise, and they want to be able to pass it off to other systems, smarter systems, something like Infoblox. And the idea there is because we have such a manpower shortage and the attackers are using asymmetrical methods, we also need to use asymmetrical methods to deal with this issue. So the number one complaint in the industry is we get too many false alerts, and then all the rest of the complaints are we need a way to programmatically address this issue. Does your organization have a dedicated individual just for DNS? Take a look at these answers and you might notice something. The answer is no. So that is the problem. But no, we don't have a person. Sure, I think security is dealing with it. It's probably up to the networking team, right? But the answer here is no. Most organizations do not have a dedicated DNS individual. What do you actually use to organize your DNS, DHCP, and your IPAM? How do you actually organize your DNS data? Of course, we do not use any of those systems. Those people, once again, they're going to be relying on manual methods to address a lot of these issues, and we're not going to be able to scale to that. We do not have enough people. And of course, eventually as we get further down the line, we do see some people are starting to actually use the tool sets to organize and understand their landscape. Context is hugely important to security. If you don't know what's on your network, you're not going to be able to address the security concerns that come along with that. And yes, if you are investigating DNS, how do you actually investigate those alerts? How do you investigate those? And once again, we see manual. Number one is manual. So we don't have enough people. We're dealing with a data lake, and most people are trying to address these issues manually. It doesn't work. It's not going to scale. So
Adam did a good job of laying out why it's important. The other part of that question, sort of the partner to it, is the question of why is DNS a target? I mean, clearly from the stats that Adam was talking about, DNS is the target, but the question is why is it the target?
Well, for one, it's been around a very long time, probably longer than some of you on the call. DNS, of course, started off with host files, but it's been around since, let's just say, shortly after the inception of the network. Before the ARPANET even went over to the internet, we've had DNS around. So it's ancient. It's also predictable. So whenever attackers are looking for different attack vectors, or whenever you're trying to get the most bang for your buck, one of the things you want to be able to look for is things that you know are going to be there. I guarantee you, any network I get into is going to be having DNS servers. They're going to be working over port 53, and my computer is naturally going to be giving the information, second I'm on that network, on how to interact with that DNS server. Very predictable.
Another aspect of it is that DNS is distributed, and this is actually one that I'm not sure people necessarily think about a lot, but this distribution is a two-edged sword. So on one hand, it's intentionally designed this way because obviously the namespace, lookup namespace for DNS for the internet is just too big to have as a centralized repository. Mm-hmm. So it is designed to be distributed, and that gives huge benefits in being able to scale to the size that's required. But what that also means is that there is no single consistent way of deploying the components to make up this distributed system. And the bigger the security, the bigger that different organizations bring to security around their portion of it can become a huge problem because it is, in fact, distributed. And we'll actually talk about that because that distribution provides areas, target areas for bad actors to focus on.
Mm-hmm. And of course, it's bidirectional. DNS can go out and DNS can come in, and it needs to work like that. By all means, it absolutely needs to work like that. And even if you're thinking, well, I've got my own internal DNS server, there's plenty of cases where even your own internal DNS information, it needs to reach out. It needs to go out to other people's gear, other people's DNS servers, and ask them information. And it usually it's just going to trust that by default, unless you've taken some stances to ensure that that's not the case.
And the final one we have is that DNS is ubiquitous, and Adam sort of referred to this. DNS is everywhere. The challenge with that is it's kind of like the air that we breathe, right? The challenge is that you have something that is so ubiquitous, it's so around you all the time that we just tend to forget that it's there, or we know the minimum amount, as Adam talked about. In a lot of organizations, the full extent of people's knowledge and interaction with DNS is knowing the IP address of the DNS server they're going to point at, and that's as far as it goes. They get the answers that they want. That ubiquity, as I said, makes it seem invisible. And, it's like the old example of the two fish talking to each other. One fish comes up and says, "Hey, how's the water?" And the other fish says, "What's water?" You're surrounded by it all the time. It becomes invisible to you.
Exactly. It's the forest from the trees. But it works, and it mostly always works, so you just don't even realize it's there. So we're going to go over a couple of different categories of attack here. So, of course, there's attacking the users with the DNS servers, with DNS, something like a denial of service, and, of course, attacking users via the DNS. Misdirection, covert transport mechanism, which we will get into as well. Attacks with the DNS. I'm just going to actually start digging into something here. So, of course, the very popular one and one you're all very familiar with is denial of service or the distributed denial of service attack. And that's just going to be brute force. We're using large number of bots to overwhelm a smaller number of endpoints, but there's also amplification attacks. And the idea behind there is we don't necessarily know. So, for instance, if I say, hi, I'd like a record for this. My name's Adam. It's going to send that information back to me. But if I go ahead and I ask, hey, give me the entire phone book, and by the way, my name's Michael, it's just going to automatically redirect those queries back to Michael. Even though he didn't ask for this traffic, he's going to get a large upsurge of a bunch of information that he didn't ask for. So there's different ways that you can do distributed attacks, and that amplification attack can be extremely powerful, specifically when you're looking for different types of records. But we'll get more into the amplification attacks as we continue here.
And I should just to put a little bit of color commentary around that, the idea with distributed denial of service attacks, we're not really talking about attacking the DNS. I mean, the DNS is used as a weapon here, but what you're really doing is attacking some endpoint with the volume of data that DNS is capable of producing. And in fact, you're not even really attacking that endpoint. You're really attacking the network components that surround the endpoint that you're targeting. Mm-hmm. And the idea is to fill up the pipe to the point that none of it functions correctly anymore, and there's no way to contact that endpoint. So just to walk through this in a graphical sense, we have an attacker and we have open DNS servers. And the open DNS servers actually is an important thing to consider, because the way that the attack works is the attacker sends off a query, and because of the nature of DNS, you can send off a relatively small query that's going to, the answer to which is going to be many times the size of the query that was used to generate it. Mm-hmm. Now, as Adam pointed out, it's an old protocol. It actually runs on UDP. By default, it's on UDP, and UDP, there's no real session involved here. So it's pretty easy to spoof UDP packets and say, hey, I'm sending this request to you, but I'm going to spoof that it was actually my target that sent the request. So send the responses back to him. And because of the type of query that I sent to you, I want that answer or the answer that will come back will be disproportionately large. So I'm going to put a load on the target. As Adam also said, we often do this in groups, like in botnets. So a large number of these ones sending in queries, all of which generate huge amounts of data, mm-hmm. which, in the end up knocking out the target.
And just to emphasize this here, that's something like a one, just as an example, a 1 kilobit output can result in, 100 kilobits of response. So it's a huge amplification. And with the distributed nature, you're able to use many, many working hands. For this presentation, I actually put together a DNS amplification attack demo, but my lab, I actually started to deprecate my lab's capability on the network. So then I went to a cloud service provider, and then I got a very strongly worded email from said cloud service provider, effectively saying, hey, we're seeing some traffic on your network. It doesn't look, so I stopped. So I'm not going to be doing that today, but you are able to, if you just Google DNS amplification attack demonstrations, you will be able to see them, and you can even stage them yourself. I would just stress to ensure that you know what network you're targeting and you understand that it very likely will result in filled pipes, depending on how big of an attack you launch. Okay. So, great. We've got these attacks. How can we actually defend against these attacks? There's configuration. Restrict who you respond to. So you might be responding internally. You might be responding to only certain zones, only certain people. But then the idea is you're not just an open DNS resolver. Everybody can't just use your DNS, of course, against you or against other people. We can restrict the type of records we're going to respond with. So even if we do have something that's publicly facing, maybe we're only going to be responding with A records and C records. Maybe we're not going to be giving out any other types of records, just to limit that attack surface. And implement rate limiting. So it's already been introduced into Bind, but there's different ways that you can do rate limiting. And a lot of it has to do with the tokens concept. And this is handled under the hood, but there are some configuration points you can use. But the idea would be there, if I'm asking for, if a certain asker is asking for repetitive information, or if a lot of people are asking for the same type of repetitive information, we eventually run out of tokens. And when we're out of tokens, we're going to start responding back very, very slowly. So it's just a way to rate limit the actual responses coming in and out of our DNS infrastructure. And of course, there's behavioral. So behavioral is not going to be with your kind of default bind. This is going to be something like an Infoblox product would deliver, and it's going to be intelligence on top of the software. And we will get into more information about the behavioral stuff, but effectively we're going to be using intelligence to look at what's happening and determine that's bad. Because you have to remember that all of these attacks, none of them are using malformed packets. None of these are a violation of the RFC. They're all DNS behaving the way DNS should behave. So that's why we do need some tools that are going to be a little bit more intelligent to address these issues.
So that's a quick look at where the DNS is actually used to attack users. And that really is, as Adam said, that's sort of a brute force attack. The other major category is where DNS is used to attack users via the DNS. So the DNS is the system by which they attack the users. And these ones tend to be considerably more devious. So they fall into sort of two categories. One where you're actually doing misdirection. So the DNS is returning something that is different than what is expected or what the accurate data is, and usually to the benefit of whoever the attacker is. Or DNS is being used as a covert mechanism for transportation of information. And we'll talk about both of these. Just before we dig into that, though, we have to look a little bit at the idea of what a recursive lookup is. So this may be, for some of you, this may be a review. For others, this is the way the DNS works, and I lay it out just so that you can understand some of the attacks. So say you're a user and you make a request to your local DNS and you say, hey, I want to go to my bank, mybank.com. I want to go to my banking portal. The local DNS likely hasn't ever seen that and certainly doesn't hold the records for that because of the distributed nature that we talked about before. So it says, oh, what do I know about? Well, I know about the root servers, the .com, .org, the ones that serve up that level. I'll send off my request to them. So they send off the www.mybank.com to the root server, and the root server says, you know what, I don't know about www.mybank.com, but I can give you the address of just mybank.com because I am aware of that. So the local one says, hey, that's great. I'm going to take that information, I'm going to put it in a cache locally so that I don't need to ask you the next time this comes in. And I'm going to send off a request to the one you told me about, to the mybank.com authoritative DNS server. That one responds and says, oh, yeah, I know about www.mybank.com. Here's the IP address. The local one, again, adds an entry to its cache and says, now I've got this for future reference, and I'll pass that IP address back to the original requester. And that requester, now you can get to your bank portal. You can do your online banking. So that's how the DNS recursive lookups work. The challenge, there's two different ways you can sort of attack this if you're an attacker. The first of these is DNS hijacking, and in DNS hijacking, you're actually taking over the functions or compromising the functions of one of the endpoints in the equation. So here we'll say that the MyBank's authoritative DNS server has been compromised. So now that compromises that when someone comes in and asks for the IP address of the banking portal, it doesn't return 1234. It returns some other IP address, 5678, which, gets passed back to the original requester. And now, rather than going to my bank web portal, you get redirected to, I've got scam sites, some sort of a site, which in most cases is going to look a lot like, or if not exactly the same as what the original bank portal looked like. So the user thinks they're in one place, but misdirection has them in another place, and it's a perfect opportunity to harvest information like, creds and usernames, passwords, for instance.
Exactly, and that scam site, one thing that is prevalent on the internet, that would be, kind of a copy of your bank's website. And when you entered your username and password, it wouldn't pop up and be like, aha, we got you. It would just say invalid username or password, but it would redirect you back to the bank's invalid username or password. So the second time you go ahead and do that, you log in, you don't even think about the fact that you got an invalid username or password. Maybe I typed it in wrong, the internet.
So, and that's absolutely true. Now that use case is if you compromise the endpoint, but because of the distributed nature, again, that we talked about before, it's possible that you don't even need to compromise the endpoint. With the concept of DNS cache poisoning, there's mechanisms that the malware can use to just make sure that the information, or to affect the information that's coming back so that the cache is incorrectly populated. So the cache becomes compromised, not the full endpoint, and the cache has a different IP address for a particular address than what the real one would be. So even though the authoritative DNS server is sending the right information back, it never gets asked because the local one has a copy in its cache, an incorrect copy, and that will get passed back, to the user when he requests mybank.com. gets sent to the scam site. The outcome is the same. The important thing here is that it's a different mechanism by which and a different part of this distributed environment of DNS that's under attack.
Okay, and of course, validating the communications. With that distributed nature, you're only as strong, the chain's only as strong as the weakest link. And we don't know all the links involved in this chain. That recursive lookup that Michael showed you, that's very common, but there's probably an additional 5 or 6 different servers that are going to be involved in there. There's going to be a lot of different handoffs. There's a lot of places where someone can be compromised, either purposefully, being the attacker, or someone who just isn't doing, the best practices to maintain their things. So one thing that besides the weakest chain of the link, think of it like the chain of custody for evidence in a court case. Every step of the line, it's been tagged and sealed and it's been analyzed. That isn't occurring with the distributed nature of DNS. No one's doing that. So it can be very difficult to actually figure out, okay, is this response I got a valid response? How do I assure this is the case? And one way that you can deal with that is the importance of something like DNSSEC. So
that was actually recognized as a shortcoming in DNS, and that hence the creation of the DNSSEC standard.
Yeah, so exactly. That didn't roll out with DNS, right? That was something they realized eventually where they say, well, how can we actually validate it? And, one quick way of boiling it down, you can think of it like SSL search. It's different, but you can think of it like SSL search for zones. So when I talk to mybank.com and I get that response, I also get a security key that's coming along for the ride that's letting me validate, okay, this is the correct response, and this person is definitely the right person that has responded to me. No one got in the middle. No man's in the middle have affected this communication. And for those of you managing your own bind servers out there, you madmen and women, you might know how difficult it can be to enable DNSSEC for different zones. It can be a lot of work, and managing bind through flat files itself can also be very difficult. But there are different tool sets out there. Of course, Infoblox, it's as easy as a checkbox for the most part. You're able to sign your zones, and you automatically know that they're going to be secure. So when I request empowered.ca and I get that response back, any subdomains from there, I'm going to understand that, yes, this has been signed, this is the authentic data, and I can trust it. So there are easier ways to implement things. That things don't have to be that painful. If you have the right tools, you're going to be able to address a lot of these issues.
Now, no problem. So that took care of talking about, or that was a bit of a talk about the idea of misdirection as an attack. So using misdirection through the DNS. The other one is really using DNS as a covert transport mechanism. And this is the idea that using DNS just to get data back and forth from the inside to the outside of the environment. So I'm just going to take a bit of a segue here just to talk about that. So you have your internal data, and you're having an internal and external world. And there's data on the internal that you may want to move in and out. That same data is stuff that people from the external world may want to get at. So, early on, people added in firewalls to decide you're going to restrict who's going to be able to get in and out. So we'll put a firewall up. Well, that does most of the case. We realized that sometimes people were getting through, so then you start adding in things like IDS and IPS so that you can recognize when someone's gotten through the firewall that it shouldn't have gotten through. And, that doesn't cover all the cases, so maybe we put an endpoint. And then you control who's going onto the network, and you have NAC. Well, now you put a bunch of layers in place, but maybe you want to control, looking for data loss and putting chain of custody around data loss, or data for the data loss, and so on and so forth, sandboxing, next generation firewalls. There's other ones you could put in here, application-specific firewalls. The endpoint or the outcome of this is that security devices actually have done a very good job, over time of starting to build up layers of challenges for bad actors that are trying to move data in or out of the network uncontrolled. Mm-hmm. They're forcing, essentially, it's not just a one-stop shop. You're forcing you to go through layers of protection, and that's, the whole idea of defense in depth is to have these layers. Unfortunately, there are certain protocols and certain services that need to go from internal to external. They're just there. And one of the ones that you can always count on being there is DNS. So DNS almost becomes, you can think of it as becoming a shortcut, a way to get around having to go through the multiple layers of the security stack, because you already have this DNS service that is exposed and open and bypasses all of these things and can't be shut off, because if you shut it off, it actually brings down the functioning of the network itself.
That's an awesome one, right?
So,
okay, and of course, different things for the covert data channels to exploit, different ways it can happen. Of course, command and control servers, bots, viruses, malware, they work on the command and control concept. So the idea is you have a piece of malware and it's just waiting to call home. It's not even malware yet necessarily. It might not even be something that a virus scanner can identify because it's not doing anything malicious, so it's not going to flag any behavioral endpoint logic. All it's doing is trying to talk home. But the idea is the second it's able to get to its command and control centers, it can become a very different beast. It can start to immediately say, okay, I've contacted my command and control center. Hey, by the way, it looks like I'm in a hospital. What would you like me to do? You know, it downloads the Get Hospital Records module and just starts getting those records. And immediately, but if it's not able to talk to its command and control center, most of the time it's just going to stand down and do nothing. It's going to be waiting for future orders. And the concept there is that with that in place, it's a lot harder to detect them, and the attacker can turn them on when it's most meaningful for them. And of course, data exfiltration. Besides agents or viruses talking to command and control centers, you can just send data right out there. We're going to go through a demonstration in a bit, but I guarantee you, for the most part, in most of your environments, unless you're running an Infoblox, a bit of a plug for Infoblox there, you're just going to be able to exfiltrate data through there. A lot of enterprises I go to, you can't hook up a USB drive, you can't get to any of your own personal data storage devices because everything's locked down. But I can just send data right out through DNS.
So just to walk you through this, so there's these two examples that Adam referred to, the command and control, which is a bidirectional, and the data exfiltration, which is unidirectional but gets the data out of the system. I just want to walk through a little bit of a graphic representation of how that happens with DNS. So you have your interior and exterior worlds, and you have data on the interior that somebody wants to get at. So you have malware that has access to that data. It can try to send the data out, but as we've already established, there's firewalls and IDS, IDP, and DLP that are there to prevent it from going directly out. But what's also there is likely a local recursive DNS server, because the organizations need recursive DNS in order for them just to carry out their day-to-day business and have the network function. And if you have a local recursive DNS server, it also has a hole through all the firewalls and the layer of protection that allows it to get out to make its recursive calls to the outside world. So the malware then takes information, the data, and essentially packages it up in the form of DNS queries. So I'm going to pretend that there is that there's an address called 1234.badguys.com. I'll send that over to my local recursive server. The local server isn't really going to know about this one. It's going to reach out to the outside to an authoritative server that knows about badguys.com. That DNS server will take the query and harvest out of that query the data that was encoded into it, the 1234 point. And now you have exfiltrated data. It's just a matter of going through, taking more chunks of that data, passing them through, until ultimately you've got the entire data set out. So now this gives you an idea of the DNS exfiltration and sort of how to move data one way, and that assumes that the authoritative badguys.com server doesn't respond, but you can think that if it's responding, it then gets to send a response in through the firewall in the opposite direction, and that response can contain encoded information that can be used either as directives or even can be used to bring in executable code that can be used on the inside.
And something worth pointing out, too, is time is a huge factor here. So you might say, well, if I get multiple NX domain lookups for a domain, maybe I should just flag that domain. But these 4 queries in this example, they could have been made months apart. So and we'll get into the how it actually plays out in reality here, but time is a huge factor, and attackers are getting smarter. So it's not like you're going to see a 10 gig spike on your DNS traffic for the day. They'll creep it by, and you won't even notice it. Reputation versus behavioral. So, of course, there's a couple different ways to deal with this type of activity. We went over some of it previously, but there's reputational, and that's going to be bad actors, signature-based type information. So, badguys.com, just for the record, isn't actually a bad guy's website, but there's going to be all those sites out there, all those known issues. And signature-based, same type of concept where we're going to be able to look at it and we'll say, okay, these sites are on existing lists. We don't want to deal with them. Anything trying to get there, block it and call somebody, ideally. And of course, there's the implemented DNS via RPZs. So the response policy zone, and that's the idea of kind of like a blacklist or a whitelist or even a maybe list. So the idea could be, if you go to this site or if something's trying to get to this site, let's just redirect them back to maybe our company policies around gambling. Or if it's a virus, block that communication off, segregate that computer to its own network, and inform security immediately.
So reputational is hugely important, and we're going to talk about another way to approach this, but reputational is hugely important because it is a valid way to deal with an awful lot of this stuff. It deals with sort of the things you know about, the ones that you can identify as being bad. And the importance of it, it's so important that for some of the really committed players in the field, and Infoblox is sort of the poster child for this one, mm-hmm. They recognized not only that it's important, but they recognized that it's so important that they invested in having their own feeds, essentially, and invested in setting up or buying in an organization that helped develop these feeds. So the quality, because really the reputational stuff, you're only as good as the feeds that you're using. So, making sure that you have super high quality feeds, that's really important. But it doesn't address all of the problems.
Mm-hmm. So, of course, there's the behavioral. We didn't go over them a bit, but what the behaviorals actually deal with are the unknown unknowns, which is still one of my favorite quotes.
Donald Rumsfeld.
So the idea is that we can block what we know, but we can't block what we don't know. So we can't start assigning domains to bad on the fly unless we see some type of behavioral component along with that. And with different providers, like Infoblox, where they're able to consolidate this data, you might only have one or two hits to a site that's potentially bad, but they can aggregate kind of across the sea of everything that's occurring, and their data teams can as well. And they can say, well, when we see this type of behavior, because we've had 100 clients identify it once or twice, they can, 100 clients seeing it once or twice is just as good as you seeing it 200, 300 times. So they're able to really use that behavioral engine to deal with those unknown unknowns.
And this is important because some of you may have heard of the concept of domain generation algorithms. So DGAs, which is when we talk about badguys.com, well, that's great, but you can block badguys.com. The way that the bad actors one of the ways that the bad actors have got around that is using things like domain generation algorithms, where they just generate on the fly new DNS domains that haven't existed before. They're just randomly created for use in the covert communication pathways or in the command and control. But by having those, by putting that together, it means that the reputational stuff isn't likely to capture it, and that's exactly the type of zero-day scenario that the behavioral approach is intended to address. And as Adam pointed out, Infoblox is, I would call them the leader in that space around in the DNS domain.
Definitely. Okay, so next up we're going to do an actual live data exfiltration demo. Just be one moment here. I'm just going to share my screen. So Infoblox has an excellent tool that they're able to use to demonstrate if data exfiltration is capable at your site. And there's a couple ways you can do this. You can do it. You can kind of cobble this together yourself, but they make it really easy for you to not just demonstrate to yourself and prove it to yourself, but you can also use it to prove to leadership or to management, hey, we've got a serious issue here. There's some ramifications that you should know, so you always want to make sure. Just be 1 second here. not sharing my screen. Just give me one moment. Okay, perfect. Sorry about that. Everything is okay. So, in order to get access to this tool, we'd highly recommend that you reach out. You can reach out to Infoblox, you can reach out to Empowered Networks, and we'd be happy to put a demo on for you. But just to show you how this kind of works here. So, what I've got is I've got some highly sensitive data here, and one presentation, but some highly sensitive data that I want to be able to get out of the network here. Here we are, some sweet credit card numbers, want to go on a shopping spree. So what I'll do with the demo site, and I'll show you just how it puts it together. Just come up here, type in the file name. I'm not going to specify my own DNS server. I'm going to use Infoblox's DNS server here. We're going to generate a script. So as you see, it outputs a couple options here, Perl, Unix, or PowerShell. For now, we'll just go with Unix. There we are. Okay. So I want to exfiltrate this file here. With the shell. And I'm just going to fire this off here. So as you see, this isn't black magic. This is just, I'm looking for a record. Hey, can I have this record? And it's responding back with NX domain. So this is the main takeaway. The first time I saw this, I was like, well, that's so obvious. Why wasn't it more obvious to me? But that's all it is. So all I'm doing, and you'll notice it's not as obvious as the demonstration we gave, where it's going to be in clear text or in plain text. This is algorithm and it's hexified. So it's encrypted and it's hexified. So the idea is we're not going to be able to see that and say, oh, social security number, right? And you might be thinking, well, I could just look for really long domains. That's not the case. There's a lot of different ways they're able to hide this and compress it. So let's see what that actually looks like on the portal side of things. And once again, I just specified the file. It chopped it up for me into a bunch of A record requests and sent them out. So nothing about this is wrong with DNS. This is all behaving as we expect it to. Here, let's go to my transfer file messages here. Payment details text. And there we go. So the data has been successfully exfiltrated all through DNS. None of the systems in the way. None of the systems have gotten in the way. I'm at a remote branch office today with Michael, not our branch office. But I want you to know the first time I attempted to do this demo on my own after the Infoblox team showed it to me, I wasn't able to successfully execute it. And I spent about an hour troubleshooting before I realized that we are an Infoblox customer. So it would let a couple of these packets make its way through, and then it would actually shut down the data exfiltration, which was an awesome demonstration, and I should have looked into it in advance to understand what was enabled in our system. But that's just one takeaway there is it shuts it down in its tracks. But another thing that's worth noting is it didn't shut it down immediately. It didn't say, oh, first domain, that's data exfiltration, that first A record request, right? It used its behavioral engine to look at it and say, this isn't right, I'm shutting this down, I'm calling this data exfiltration, send a human being over here to look at this, I think we got a problem. And it was right. Just to kind of show you that again in a different way, we'll just do the same. So, super secret text. So we'll do it in Windows, different types of records, just a way to really generate this. But here we are. So it's just an NS lookup, right? Or a dig command for any Unix people on board here. But this doesn't say super secret text anywhere, and if I could always use more text than I will just to really hammer home the point. I've got my awesome security numbers. Paste that in there. Great. So now we've got just a bunch of NS lookups. Just going to open up PowerShell here. Fire. Okay, it's, nothing's wrong. It behaved exactly the way it should have. None of these domains exist. But there we are. There's all that data. It's been exfiltrated. So just once again, before we jump back to the slideshow there, it's an excellent tool. There's a couple more cool features about it. I'd strongly recommend that you do reach out to Infoblox or Empowered Networks, and we'd be happy to give you a demo and show you how your network might be vulnerable, and more importantly, we can help you deal with that capabilities. It could be happening in your environment right now. Stop sharing here. Okay.
So where we've talk to you about the various different ways that we can approach or that the DNS can be used as an attack vector, as well as to specifically attack people with DNS, but also to use it as a mechanism to carry out other attacks. So we asked you a question at the beginning of how many people feel that their organization is susceptible to DNS-based attacks. We're actually going to ask that same question again, just to see, knowing what you know now with the information we provided, how you feel now about the susceptibility of your organization. So this is deja vu. You're seeing the same question again. We're just wondering whether there's been any change in your view now that you've seen what's possible in the DNS realm.
What really hammered it home for me when I was first being explained all this is, and it makes a lot of sense, it was around since the 80s, even earlier, and people just used to pass host files around. So when they built this protocol, it was never meant to be the most secure thing in the planet. It was meant to be a phone book. That was it. So what they've done since then, it's better protocol now, but they've kind of patched it together, and they're addressing security concerns as they move. But one way or the other, it's a phone book, right? So it has to behave a very certain way.
All right. So now that we've given you a few minutes to put it in, let's see. Well, as it turns out, we didn't shift people's views on this.
We have some more extremely likelies.
We have some more extremely likelies. That's right.
That's the important part. We have some more extremely likelies.
Not that we're trying to terrify you all. It's more that ubiquity and that the blindness to things that are all around us. That's actually the biggest challenge in the DNS security space, is just making people aware of DNS as an attack vector and what can happen through it. So, yeah, this is, we're still pretty much on the curve, but we shifted the curve a little bit.
We shifted it towards there, and plus that just means that we have some, people understand how vulnerable this is. It's a smart group, right? So that makes a lot of sense.
All right. All right, and that actually concludes our presentation for the day. We hope you've enjoyed it. Are there any questions that have been asked?
So I see there's one question here from Anne-Marie. She says, do all Infoblox DNS appliances block data exfiltration, or do you need a particular module and or software version? And I'm happy to field that myself. So the DNS exfiltration is behavior-based. There's two ways to solve that. There is the on-prem approach, for which you will need the analytics license or feature. We also have this capability in our SaaS-based DNS services. So if you're using Blox1 Threat Defense, then that behavior-based analytics is in there as well. So you can do it either on-prem or in the cloud. If you do it on-prem, you need a bigger appliance and the right license for it.
Mm-hmm. And just to add to that too, some of the advantages with the cloud as well is there's actually some agents that you can have on your computer. That way when you're working, like me and Michael, if we're at a remote branch office, and I had the Infoblox product on my client right now, I wouldn't have been able to do that data exfiltration demo. It would have been working with all the same type of security that we're used to. There are some advantages with cloud, especially with the way that the traffic's flowing, right?
That is correct. Yes. So for the SaaS platform, you can run that from a single site in your organization, but you can also deploy the endpoint to all the clients that are under your organization, and that way they are protected from this no matter where they are, because they're always using a secure DNS service. Another question that came up here is, what's the best way to contact Infoblox or Empowered for a DEX demo? DEX being the data exfiltration portal.
Correct. Yes, and feel free to reach out to us.
Yeah, definitely. Feel free to reach out to Infoblox if you've got your account reps, and of course, feel free to reach out with Empowered Networks. There will be some follow-ups after this, and we'd be thrilled to do the demo for you as well on site. And we can also go over some of the other products and solutions Infoblox offers to ensure that your DNS is, absolutely solid and absolutely secure and scalable.
So I see one other question here is, doesn't DOH or DOT eliminate some of these threats? And that's a really interesting question because those are kind of hot topics. For those that aren't aware, DOH is DNS over HTTPS, and DOT is DNS over TLS, the transport layer. So both of these are mechanisms in which you can send DNS queries in a secure package. So much like over HTTPS. So an encrypted mechanism. Do these eliminate the threats? And I think this is a good question because this is an area that people get confused on. They assume that because it's over HTTPS or TLS, that somehow it's going to eliminate the type of problems that we were talking about right now. But that's not actually what DOH or DOT are intended to do. They are intended to protect visibility of what types of queries are being sent to someone who's observing those on the wire. They actually don't address the chain of custody, for instance, that Adam was referring to before. And they don't actually do anything to protect against exfiltration of data. In fact, we've already seen examples in the wild of people or of malware that's able to exfiltrate data in the same way that we've shown you here. They're just doing it over DOH as opposed to an unencrypted one. So,
and one way to boil that down is, if a virus on my computer is using a VPN, it doesn't change any of the outcomes. It doesn't change any of the behavior. So yeah, sure, the communication mechanism is secure, but it's still a virus on my computer. It's still behaving the same way it always behaved. So they're great solutions. I hope they keep developing them as they move forward. But neither of those solutions are going to solve any of these problems that we've brought up today.
And there's, of course, a lot more to learn about and to work with DNS and security, like DANE TLSA, some of the other ingrained features that are in there to protect you. Anything there?
Sorry.
No, it's all
Sorry.
the questions. Yep. That looks like it's all the questions for now there.
Yep.
All right. Well, in that case, allow me to wrap this up. Thank you so much, you both, for your time and your willingness to demo and demonstrate. I'm looking forward to organizing the next one in the series. If you're attending, please make sure to fill out the survey. It really helps us getting better at these and making sure that we hit the target every single time. And yeah, reach out to Empowered and Infoblox for a demo or for an account on Dex if you want to demo it yourself and show your peers. You'll be the star of the DNS party.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Ingmar. And thank you, everyone, for all your time today. It's very much appreciated.
All right. Well, we'll be following up with the recording and the slides. And I wish you all a pleasant rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.